Our next speaker will be talking about protecting sources of drinking water in Alberta, a guide to source water protection planning. Anuja Ramgoolam, I hope I got that right, is the operations manager for the Alberta Water Council and the Clean Air Strategic Alliance, working with multi-stakeholder groups to develop solutions for provincial air and water management challenges. Originally from Trinidad and Tobago, Anuja studied environmental and natural resource management at the University of the West Indies. Afterwards, she lived in Ontario for several years, where she took her master's degree in environmental studies at York University, and worked for a number of nonprofit environmental groups and later on a conservation authority. Throughout her career, she has developed specialized skills in public participation, conflict resolution, negotiation, and consensus decision participation. As an avid traveler, photographer, and hiker, she is always chasing an adventure. So please help me welcome Anuja Ramgoolam.
I hope everybody could see me. I'm not as tall as the minister, so hopefully everybody can hear and see me just fine. So good morning. Thank you so much for this awesome opportunity to be here to talk about something very dear to all of us, which is water and protecting water, not just for humans, but for the environment and for the economy. So a little bit about the content of my presentation today. I'll just take a moment to tell you about the Alberta Water Council, make sure that everybody knows about us and what we do. A little bit of background about this project, and just an FYI, we are finished with this project and just working to get it publicly released so that everyone can start using this great tool. Share a couple of project findings, next steps, and if you have any questions, but I want to keep things short because I know people want to get on your break. So a show of hands, who has heard about the Alberta Water Council? Not bad, pretty awesome, thanks. For those who don't know about us, we are a multi-stakeholder partnership with 24 different members, from the government to NGOs and different industry groups, and the AIDA is actually one of our members, and they actively participate in various projects that we have, including this one, and some others that I will mention later on. We are one of the Water for Life partnerships, in addition to WPACs, WSGs, the Government of Alberta, and other organizations. And we work mainly on a consensus-based decision-making process. So no fighting, no voting. We try to find consensus on various issues. Some are easier than others, to be frank. At the end of the day, we want to provide advice on provincial water management challenges and opportunities, and most of our work comes from the Government of Alberta, with the exceptions of some other clients from the Council. So what is source water protection? Many of you have heard about this, but it's actually a very proactive risk management process that serves to protect drinking water at the source. And as you know, the other parts of the multi-barrier approach include the drinking water treatment, as well as looking at infrastructure and the system. But if we try really hard to protect drinking water from where it actually comes from, we actually improve human health, and we actually save a lot of money and try to protect the environment in the long run. So we try to foster more protection at the source just to bring that awareness. So a bit more about this project itself is that it really emanates and aligns with a lot of ongoing provincial water management initiatives. One in particular that everyone knows about is the Water for Life strategy and its goal to ensure that we have safe and secure drinking water supplies for all Albertans. So we're trying to keep with that mantra. There's also drinking water safety plans, and Alberta should be very proud that this has been mandatory in our province. And we're actually one of the few provinces to do that in the country. So good job. Several communities are also developing source water protection plans. And these are just some examples about what's on the go right now. And what do you get by when you see that? Is that source water protection is happening in the province, but it's happening in different ways, in pockets. It's probably not, there's no common provincial approach. And that's where this project comes in. The Alberta Water Council is striving to provide a common way for anyone, particularly at the sub-regional or watershed scale, to try and develop source water protection plans collaboratively. And it's all, at this point, it's voluntary and it's an ad hoc process. But how do you foster that collaboration and make sure everyone's doing it at the right capacity and the right level to increase those relationships and get the most out of the process that we can? So you might have remembered in, I think it was 2013, we had the GOA-led water conversations. And one thing that really stuck out from that was that Albertans, they have told us, they said, hey, you know, we need to do more with regards to protecting drinking water. We want to see more plans. We want to see more action taken in this regard. So that's where this project came to the Alberta Water Council, and we decided to take action. Here are the project objectives that we covered. So basically, to summarize, it says we're going to go out there, we're going to see what's on the go in Alberta. We're going to see what's missing, if there are any gaps. We also wanted to look at related initiatives because, as you know, this is a huge topic and it overlaps with pretty much everything. There's different levels, there's different players. So sometimes the team kind of struggled with staying in scope and making sure that we examine the right thing. We also thought it'd be valuable to look at our jurisdictions, and later on I'll try to share some of those findings with you. And then we tried to tie all of that up to say, what do we really learn from all of that information? And we used that to feed it into developing a guide with different steps for pretty much anyone could take it up and try to collaborate, form a group to develop a source water protection plan. So now I'll share just a summary of some of the key highlights. It's a lot of information, so I tried to boil it down as much as I can, but I'm really happy to share more information with you guys later on if anybody wants more of the details. So to achieve our objectives, we thought it'd be useful to look at some of the drinking water treatment plants, pull the data on that and see what trends we find. We also compiled a list of all the risks, practices, and approaches. We conducted a scan of other jurisdictions, selected areas to compare and see what they had success with, and also lessons learned that we could potentially apply to our province. With that, we finalized a draft guide with different steps. We also created a sort of a companion report, which is like a huge encyclopedia that people have as reference material that they can go to. And we took this for sector engagement at all our AWC sectors to see what they had to say. And I'll share some of the input with you guys because it might resonate with you in terms of the challenges with source water protection today. So if you look at this map, it just shows you drinking water treatment systems and sources in our province. And keep in mind, this is just a snapshot of what we found probably like a year and a half ago. Things might have changed. And also, we're only limited to data that we could get from our government AAP. They really helped us with providing this data. So there might be other sources of drinking water treatment systems that may not have been captured here. Most of these systems tend to serve the smaller municipalities, and there are over 2,000 microsystems being regulated by AHS, and there's also the Indigenous communities as well. This other map shows you that we really, in general, depend on surface water for drinking water mainly, but there's also reliance on groundwater under the influence of surface water as well as just groundwater. And as many of us know, regionalization is something that's also increasing as well. So instead of the smaller communities are coming together to save on resources, maximize capacity, so regionalization seems very attractive to them. We also sent out a questionnaire, targeted questionnaire to the drinking water providers, and we also sent out a survey to public and private organizations, as well as individuals who own wells and dugouts. What we wanted to find out with our survey is to see, well, what practices are you guys using? What challenges are you finding with regards to drinking water protection? What lessons have you learned? What could you share with us? We also invited Indigenous communities to participate. So general high-level survey findings is that public and private organizations are basically involved in a lot of different types of approaches. It's not very clear-cut. So it ranges from sitting on a committee to provide input for a source water protection plan, or helping create a guidance document at the policy level, or doing stewardship activities on land. So it's really hard to really find a clear distinction. Most approaches tend to provide lots of information out. There's lots of legislation, policies, plans, and guidance. But where the gap really falls is where are the actual tools for implementation? And that's one thing I want everybody to take away from this presentation today is that there's a lot of good work, but we're still stuck in planning. And you know, we love to plan and we love to write plans, but we have to implement it and find the information and the data that can actually transform those plans into action into the ground. So the common theme throughout all of our findings is that we need more resources, we need access to that data and awareness, and we also need to find better integration between all the levels of planning. With the targeted drinking water providers, they also said the same thing as well. They talked about their source water risk and everything. Most of it that we found were over-extraction, contamination, aquatic invasive species like the minister was speaking about earlier. Drought is also something that's on the radar, climate variability. But one thing that really stuck out for them is, hey, I do my drinking water safety plan. How is that different from a source water protection plan? There are similarities and there's differences. But the main difference to note is that the source water protection plan looks at the watershed as a whole. But the drinking water safety plan kind of focuses more on the treatment and it focuses more on mitigating risk. So we need to somehow find those synergies and form that collaboration. Another thing that the drinking water providers said was, hey, there's so much levels of planning, like how do I integrate, where do I fit in, where do I provide input? We also undertook a brief literature review where we looked at various, we kind of dug up everything to say, we want to know where a source water protection is being focused. So at a provincial level, obviously, there's a lot of policy and guidance documents, there's a lot of legislations, plans, programs, and tools. But when we look at tools, only some are limited, and they're very limited in what they provide and for what stage. So you might have lots of tools to help you with making a plan, but you might have lots of tools to help you characterize your source water area. And that's probably the most important step and the most challenging step for people who are trying to make a plan. This chart, I won't kill you with it, but it just shows you the scale of complexity with regards to where source water protection actually fits in. So we have watershed planning on one side, and we have land use planning on the other side. And what most people who are involved in this world have to say is, hey, this is really complicated. Like, source water protection transcends all scales. So where does it really fit in? Who is supposed to do it? And how do we get it done? Make sure it's integrated well to make good use of capacity and not duplicate efforts. So from our jurisdictional scan findings, which I'll give you a little snippet about, most of the source water protection planning occurs at the watershed or sub-regional level. We took some time to look at a few countries, and they're listed there. We tried to compare findings with the Alberta context because each country is so different. So we can't take something from Australia and just drop it in Alberta because they have different governance structures, they have different laws and legislations. The culture is a bit different there, so it won't be a perfect fit, but we could certainly learn things from them. We also tried to identify how these would be applied in Alberta. So we picked these areas, you might be wondering, based on the similar geography of Alberta, the land use activities, the conditions that it faces. And we also tried to find some areas that are different, and in terms of they had some lessons learned. Like California and Australia, they have a lot of water scarcity issues, and these have been challenging. So we need to plan for that in Alberta. Last but not least, for the jurisdictional scan, here are some main top highlights that we found. So education and training is really important. If you get the public to know where their sources are and why it's important, it will make planning and collaboration much easier. We also found that the states, example, California, Colorado, you could go online and actually download templates to make plans, to develop a plan with your committee. It's that easy. There's also a lot of incentives, like one state, I believe it was Colorado, they actually provide you an incentive to create your plan 25% up. And once you complete the plan, they pay you the rest of the money as an incentive to make sure you complete the plan. They also provide more incentives for smaller communities who might not have the capacity to do this themselves to actually pool their resources together to complete it. And in Ontario, as you know, they're kind of leading the way there, and I'm a bit biased because I work there. But they have the Conservation Authorities Act and also the Clean Water Act that mandates source water protection has to be done and on a regular basis. And in BC, they have a really good risk assessment tool because they know, hey, we don't have a lot of resources, but this is probably the most difficult step when it comes to creating a plan. So they focus their attention on that to give people the tools to make their plan successful. How does this relate to Alberta? You might be wondering. But here we have lots of people doing different things in different places. We need to centralize that. We need to provide more information. We need to fill those data gaps. In the United States, for example, they have something called the Source Water Collaborative, where you can go online. You could actually see a map of the whole country. You could see where your source water is, and you could actually see all the risk regarding land use activities, all your partners. You could see where plans are being made. This can make life really easy here if we give that a try. Collaboration among stakeholders is also very important, and we need to also have clearly defined roles. So I got asked this question many times, who's gonna do this? So we need to assign a plan champion or lead, and that's very important. And in the other jurisdictions, most of these people self-select, or like I said, the WPACs and municipalities have a really important role in this. And so far, from the plans that we have seen in Alberta, it has shown that municipalities and WPACs are taking a lead. And public lands, source water protection might be important, happen there, but you might ask, well, what about the private lands? So that's where stewardship initiatives come into place. For example, the Working Well program is pretty awesome. So with all that, we took this information and tried to develop a guide to source water protection planning. And this just gives you some simple steps to take you through the development process. Create your committee and a vision, characterize your area, have some goals, develop the plan, implement, and also evaluate and revise. These steps are pretty common to all source water protection planning processes throughout. We really mirrored it based on looking at different examples, and more in particular the American Waterworks Association standard. They have the G300 guide, which we really followed closely. All that information that I talked about earlier, we rolled that up into a big companion report, which is the standard Alberta Water Council report. So it's a good reference material to use with this guide. When I mentioned earlier about sector engagement, we did talk to all of our sectors on the AWC about what they thought about the guide and where they saw any gaps or concerns. And these are the main ones, and we try to address them within a report. Again, drinking water plans and source water protection plans, make sure we have that integration. The drinking water providers, some of them really want to be involved, others not so much, because this is seen as a nice to have, not must have. Especially if you're a smaller drinking water provider, you have other priorities and limited resources. We also need to encourage more collaboration with key groups, because that's the only way this is going to be a success. More funding and expertise if possible. I know that's not like a thing in these times. It's kind of thing, resources are very tough to come by. But if we come together and build capacity, that could also help. We also need to increase the awareness of why drinking water is important and why we need to protect it, and more importantly, where it comes from. A lot of people don't have an attachment to the source or even know where their drinking water comes from. And last but not least, integrating with land and water management work, making sure that we're not duplicating efforts and we're building on those synergies. So next steps in this process is, as I mentioned, we're finished with this work. It was officially approved by the Alberta Water Council last year. We want to implement a communications plan, which is try to get the word out about this guide as much as we can. So if anyone in this room thinks there's an opportunity to promote this idea, please let me know. We'd also like to publicly release the report within the next coming months. And I'm really excited about number 3, which is a potential phase 2. So not just talking about what we need, but we would actually like to start the process of creating some of those tools and centralizing it into one area for people to use. So that project idea is actually coming up for approval at a future AWC meeting, and fingers crossed it gets approved. And just a plug for our other AWC initiatives, so you guys know, we have the Water for Life Implementation Review Committee that's looking at the progress of Water for Life right now. The minister spoke a lot about drought, and that is a concern, particularly here in the South. Rest assured, we are doing a little bit part to bring awareness and see how we can help communities adapt and change. So we have a Building Multi-Year Resiliency project team, and their guide should be completed pretty soon and released later this year. We also have a brand new working group kicking off, and they're almost complete drafting a terms of reference to host a simulation about improving drought resiliency. So if that is approved, work will start on that later this year. One last note is we have a sister organization, the Clean Air Strategic Alliance. It's pretty much equivalent to the AWC, but the only thing is that they focus on air quality management and not so much water like we do. So just if anybody has any questions about that, they can let me know. So I'll just take a few questions if you have. If not, we could chat during the break, but happy to chat now.
Hi, good presentation, thank you very much. Chris Gallagher with the Tabor Irrigation District. I'm curious to know if you've had any feedback from the Alberta government about the potential for any of this becoming regulatory, and because you see the trend. It starts with voluntary participation, and then they start to implement regulations. And then a second part of that question, anticipating that, what do you recommend would be the first steps for an irrigation district, because there are probably 50 communities that we supply drinking water to. What's our role in that?
Great, thanks for the hard questions. I'll do my best. So the first one is, right now this document is not to be considered policy. It's been approved by the AWC as just a guide or a step-by-step. If the Alberta government wants to take this on their own and move it into something else, it's entirely up to them. But as now, it's not intended to be policy, and I don't see it being, it's not going to transform into that because it was approved by all these 6 sectors by consensus to not be policy. Question 2 is with regards to what the first steps would be is just build collaboration. Like the WPACs are a really good unit, and they've showed a lot of interest and been an active player at our table with this plan of this process development. So really collaboration with the municipalities and the WPACs is very important to mobilizing this. And I really see them self-selecting as a champion where possible. We want to be careful, and we didn't want to designate somebody as a champion, but we've seen people self-select so far. So I would say that just keep building those connections and making that a priority where possible. Any last questions or comments? Okay.
Rick Ross, retired. Did you consider the New York story at all in your out-of-country references?
Not particularly, no, but if you could send me information, I could be happy to pass it along. But we did look at various case studies, but not that particular one. Okay, well, I'm around in the break and during lunchtime, and as I mentioned, if anybody wanted more details about the studies, I'm happy to share that. Thanks so much for having me.